Welcome. My name is Lauren Bonica, and I am the Director of Emergency Services with Merit. We're thrilled to have so many of you joining us today throughout the nation, from large emergency management agencies, some federal, some local and state, some private, public healthcare, private consulting companies. But what's most important is that's that whole community that we talk about so often, and we don't get a chance to really practice it and bring it together. So I think this is a super amazing opportunity for us to do that. And I'd like to also thank you all for those of you who are been in emergency management for most of your lives and those who are just beginning, because we can't do it without you. And we're very excited to have a great cross section of folks who have come with us today. I've been with emergency management for 23 years. I love providing safety and service excellence through all hazard inclusiveness. Before my time with Merit, I was honored to serve at Collier County Emergency Management and New Jersey Primary Care Association, and continue to love to be with my fire department at Lawrenceville Fire Company. At this time, I'm going to introduce our amazing other panelists who are joining us today to talk about recovery. And recovery is kind of like the most important piece of the EM cycle, but oftentimes we leave it out. So the first amazing guest and friend that I'd like to introduce to you all is, there we go, Director Kevin Guthrie. Director Guthrie has been spared a few minutes of his amazing team's time today from his response with Hurricane Ian, and we'd like to thank the Florida Division of Emergency Management and all of their leadership for the outstanding service to all that they have given. Director Guthrie's got more than 30 years of experience in public safety and emergency management throughout Florida. And in 2018, Governor Rick Scott appointed Director Guthrie as the Chief of Staff for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Luckily, 2019, we got to keep Kevin around a little bit longer through Governor Ron DeSantis and appointed him as Deputy Director, where now he serves as the Deputy State Coordinating Officer and the State Emergency Response Chief. So welcome, Director Guthrie. We are honored and thrilled to have you for about a few minutes today. So we can't wait to hear about recovery and what that looks like for Florida Division of Emergency Management. Our next amazing guest is Chief Chris Byrne from City of Marco Island. And Chief Byrne's career began in 1983. We have to feel bad for him. He lives in Marco Island and serves on Marco Island. So the crazy part is he was retired and came back. So while he had a fishing pole in hand, I have no doubt Chief came back to serve the island and has been with us for 33 years with Marco Island Fire Rescue Department. After Hurricane Irma, he became the FEMA liaison and at minimum helped acquire $10 million in hazard mitigation grant and program funds. And we're thrilled to have him joining us today and share some of his amazing local leadership and expertise with us. And wrapping up our introductions is Michael Azamore. And Michael Azamore is such a great story and another amazing leader in emergency services. He's the CEO of Dynamic International and is dedicated to helping public safety market and understand and basically obtain the billions of dollars in grant money that is out there. And a lot of times we've got these incredible agencies who have ideas and projects, but they have no way to navigate to get those funds. So we're super grateful to have this entire group of folks join us today, and we'll begin. So thank you, everybody, again. Hi, Director Guthrie. I see
Hello.
That you've joined us from your very luxurious office today.
That's correct.
I think we would be remiss if we didn't begin by just asking you a little bit about Hurricane Ian, and thank you again for joining and for your team sparing you. But can you please describe what comes to mind when you focus on recovery operations and what that looked like for you and your team?
Doing a lot of driving is what that like. See here for me joining from the car. So we're not just recovering from Hurricane Ian, we're also recovering from Hurricane Nicole. Between these two disasters, a Cat 4 hurricane and a Cat 1 hurricane, Florida is probably going to see the largest financial disaster in our history. We certainly got a 1-2 punch out of this one, even though that Hurricane Nicole was only a Cat 1 hurricane. Typically in Florida, we have a party over a Cat 1 hurricane. But in this situation, having been on the heels of a Cat 4 hurricane, it made our entire East Coast vulnerable to, would have been vulnerable to even just a nor'easter. So we've lost a lot of beach as a result of Hurricane Ian and Nicole on the East Coast of Florida. Obviously, in Hurricane Ian for Fort Myers Beach, which was ground zero, and the associated counties, Collier County, Charlotte County, Sarasota County, Lee County, inland a little bit to DeSoto County. Those are most catastrophically hit. And then Hurricane Ian brought with it a 500-year flood event for Central Florida, which is where I'm actually at right now, looking at some of the damage and recovery of Hurricane Ian's 500-year flood event. So, there's damage, and I think it's, I'm going to get me off guard with this, but I think we have damage in 47 out of Florida's 67 counties as a result of Hurricane Ian and Hurricane Nicole. So that's what's going on that front. We will probably be in the recovery process. I'm glad that Lauren actually said recovery is the most important. I think all four layers of emergency management, preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation are all equally important. But I think in recovery, we don't do enough to prepare for recovery. We don't do enough to prepare for mitigation. We talk a lot about response and emergency management, and actually many of our local emergency management agencies are really just focused on two things at the emergency management level, and that ends up being response and preparedness. Typically, especially in Florida, only about 20% of our agencies, our local emergency management agencies, actually do recovery and mitigation. Recovery and mitigation is usually handled by somebody else that's outside of emergency management. And, one of the things that I know Lauren's probably going to ask me is, there's a disconnect between recovery, building projects and products for reimbursement, and response, and actually collecting that data. So I'm sure we're going to go more into that, but we need to be doing more across the country. And Florida's been leading the way on this in the last 2.5 years. But we need to be doing more to prepare for recovery, not prepare for just response.
Thank you very much. And thank you for saying all phases are equal. I apologize to the phases of emergency management. They are all equal. We don't have, but we do have favorites, just saying. Director, recently, FEMA, our friends, reported that they have provided more than $2.69 billion in federal grants, disaster loans, and flood insurance to the state of Florida following Hurricane Ian. And that number is probably not even enough anymore. For those of us on this call that are new to recovery and learning what that looks like and how that happens, can you discuss how hurricane joins us and then money comes back to the state? And I know that's a very big question, but
yeah, so I think in that FEMA report out, 2.69 billion, I think we got to break that down first. Is about 1 billion of that is individual assistance as a part of that 2.69 billion number, and then another nearly billion of that is small business administration loans. So those are direct individual assistance type issues. Now, what's I think an underrun in that number is that leaves the 0.69 billion. So I will tell you right now, the Florida Division of Emergency Management by itself has encumbered $1.8 billion. So that number, obviously that's twice that 0.69 billion, but it's we've encumbered $1.8 billion from in public assistance, category B, category A work. We haven't even got into category C through G yet. So just the state of Florida alone is $1.8 billion as of today. So one of the things that we obviously have to do with FEMA is we have to make sure that we document what we're doing effectively. I'm going to stay, and again, one of the reasons we have Merit as a partner is we need to not just document it, we need to document it through good structured data. One of the things that takes so long to get your money back is if you're taking things analog, you're actually sitting in a car today, writing out your log, writing out what you're doing, and it's analog, that is going to cause delays. if you digitize that, which we have done in Florida, we believe is the first state managed approach where we are trying to get every city, county, and special district in the state of Florida to go to digital format. We actually incentivize on the recovery process in Florida for an entity to go digital, utilizing our platforms. So in other words, what that means is if they do that, we'll give them 5% more just by going digital. Because what that means for the state and the state managed approach, we hear that all the time, federally supported, state managed, locally executed, right? State managed means I'm managing the risk of what's going to happen in the future with all of this money, which will probably end up being somewhere between $4 and $6 billion that'll be passed through to local entities. So I'm trying to manage that risk by utilizing good structured data that's collected on a platform that will then help us do machine learning and maybe even some AI on the background where it's learning to be better. What do I mean by that very quickly? And I'm sure cities and counties have had this happen. You have a firefighter or a police officer that works 26 hours in a 24-hour day, which is physically impossible. But on the analog form that they're filling out, it looks like it's a 26-hour day. Or you have the same firefighter, law enforcement officer, even to the point of contractor, actually working in 4 different locations on the same day at the same time, which again is physically impossible. So by going into a structured platform with structured data, accounting for a individual resource, even though that resource may be on a strike team, a task force, or some other group, accounting for single resources by the date, by the time, on a good structured data platform allows us to submit paperwork much earlier. I'll give you an example. Right now in the division, we have already applied for, out of our $1.8 billion, we have already applied for $1.2 billion in Category B protective measures. Why? And we've done that in less than 60 days. Why? Because we're on a good structured digital platform, which allows us to capture data sets of time management, what they've actually done. Again, if they're not eligible, for instance, law enforcement, I don't know how many law enforcement officers we have. I'm a former police officer myself. Patrol is not an eligible activity. When you utilize a good structured platform like Merit on an ICS 214 that has a drop-down menu of what are the eligible activities on the Merit app, as well as our digital platform that's Excel driven, you won't even see the opportunity to select patrol because it's not eligible. So don't have your day-to-day regular police officers filling out a form. Now, are they evacuating on an ingress-egress site? Yes, that's an eligible activity. Are they protecting critical infrastructure, key resources? Yes, they are. Are they managing damage assessment? Yes, they are. But again, patrol is not one of those. Patrol, don't even make them fill out a 214. You'll make their life happier. You'll make our life happier. And again, if it's good structured data going in, if we get good data going in, we're going to get good data going out, and we're going to be much, much faster at what we do.
That's outstanding, incredible, phenomenal advice and leadership as always. So thank you. Thank you very much, Director Guthrie. We appreciate that. I think this is a great opportunity for us to pivot now to Chief Burns at Marco Island. And we welcome again interaction between any of our amazing guests on this call right now. Chief Burns, maybe we can just start a little bit with a nod to your experiences with Hurricane Ian. And while we know Nicole was gracious, perhaps what that looked like for you as a chief and EM director and to your staff in the city and how that worked for you.
Thank you, and good morning or good afternoon to everyone that's visiting us today. Hurricane Ian for our city and Collier County, again, no two disasters are the same. No two hurricanes are the same. This one was certainly a challenge as we dealt with storm surge during really tropical storm force winds. So our operational people were able to remain in the field. However, the amount of water we dealt with resulted in we didn't have much of a fleet to respond to emergencies. So we were operating out of some military surplus high water vehicles, which came out of our experience during Hurricane Irma. So as the director said, as you finalize response and move into recovery and mitigation, that's the time to look at, really your resources to plan your projects, to pursue some financial assistance. We had tremendous damage in our community from flooding. We're an island. The tide takes the water out, so we recover fairly quickly. The state of Florida has done a tremendous job over the years with its building codes to deal with wind. And I think now we're going to, and we've been dealing with flood, but I think this storm is putting a new focus on stormwater surge flooding for the coastal region.
You mentioned wind, so I definitely want to make sure you talk about your wind retrofitting that you did. But one of my favorite things about working with you, Chief, is obviously you're still wearing that white shirt and representing Fire Strong, but adapting in our field is so important. And you kind of can't be on the hose line, you can't be on the nozzle and put the fire out and run the emergency. And so I love how you have evolved in your career along the way from being directly involved with fire, but then moving into emergency services, but most importantly, recovery and what that looks like locally as a leader. So can you share with us a little bit about how emergency services and recovery works for you in the city of Marco Island?
So for me and us in our city, it's all about teamwork. It's all about all of our critical departments, our first responder departments, police, fire, public works, and utilities, primarily working on our recovery plans and our mitigation plans. We spend as much time in recovery and mitigation planning future protection of our city infrastructure, not just fire rescue. So I need to spend a lot of time collaborating with my other directors, understanding their needs, understanding their systems. I've learned a tremendous amount about water and sewer utility that typically is not a fire chief's responsibility to really know much about, but to understand their mitigation projects and their activities during recovery was very important and proved successful as we move forward with some mitigation funding. So I think collaboration, teamwork, and just consistently working on your planning and preparedness, year round. It's a nonstop job.
You spoke about wind a little bit earlier, and I might get this figure wrong, but a couple of years ago, Marco received $2.5 million in a federal grant to install backup generators at a sewer pumping station. And I know since that time, and if you could comment a little bit about a few of the different projects that you've raised money for, what the application process looked like, and then what the results were, and how did it make out during Ian? I'm just curious. And if anyone has questions, by the way, please feel free to throw your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we share them with everybody.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So the mitigation grant process all starts with approval for me and our directors. Our city manager and city council has to support the effort for us to apply. And we present our projects to our city council for that approval. In Collier County and throughout Florida and other states, then it goes to our local mitigation strategy working group, where our projects are presented and scored and eventually placed on a list that the state utilizes to award funding along with our application process. We do that work all internally. We develop our own projects. We develop our own applications solely because we do have some experience in that. So out of Hurricane Irma, we identified several city facilities that needed some wind retrofit. Our primary headquarters fire station was damaged, needed reconstruction in a code plus type of construction. And then the significant generator project that you spoke of provided 60 portable trailer mounted generators to power our lift stations, our sewer lift stations during the emergency, during the incident, as we, of course, as a barrier island, we lose power very, very quickly. And what's important in the utilization of those generators is we're also a very environmentally sensitive area. And these generators operating the lift stations, keeping them operational prevents sewage spills, which will then, of course, result in an environmental emergency. So that's one example of how, coming out of Hurricane Irma in 2017, we enacted this project. We received funding for our hazardous mitigation grant, and received the equipment and had it ready to go and deployed for this event, Hurricane Ian, and it proved very successful. Our other projects are hardening structures, some other generator projects, and we had additionally, I'll add, a stormwater drainage project of one of our main roads that serves as an evacuation route. And for the majority of this storm, we had no flooding on that road. So again, recovery and mitigation, developing those projects and pursuing them is a positive result for our community.
Last question for you, and then we'll nudge Michael a little bit. What is the most challenging part?
The most challenging part is committing the time to pursue, to develop, apply, pursue this type of funding. And I will say Director Guthrie also hit it right on the head. And where we're trying to move as a city, we have to take advantage of digital, electronic capture of documentation. Our projects, at least on the public assistance side, have been slowed due to continuing to document on paper. So we are moving in that direction. That is one of the areas. Documentation is one of the most challenging areas that needs the greatest attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Burns. Maybe I'll ask the same question of you, Michael, and we'll start with kind of the end in mind and share what are some of the most challenging areas that you've worked with your clients and customers for recovery and financial support.
Great question. I would say the biggest challenges I see is mostly the resourcefulness. And what I mean by that is not resourcefulness of what to do to solve the problem, resourcefulness in terms where to look for money. Nobody in public safety takes a public safety job to write grants for a living. It's come with the job. And so that being in mind, you know, the idea of, okay, where can I look for money? You know, we're conditioned in this market really to go to the feds, you know, the federal government, you know, supplying DHS funds, hazardous mitigation funds, assistance of firefighters grant. Then you have CARES Act and you have ARPA now. And the federal government funds, it's a good amount of money. No disagreement there. There's so much additional funding in your backyard that you don't even think about. Things, you know, from private organizations like your community foundations, manufacturers that do business in your community, service companies in your community. Maybe your organization has a foundation set up for your specific agency, private or public charities. Really learning where to look for the money and then start building relationships with those organizations in your backyard. They have a vested interest for you to be prepared as well as respond, as well as recover. And so they're willing to fund projects that keep the community operational, able to grow, and also be able to handle a disaster when it comes up.
One of the things I am most impressed with what your company does, and I told you I wouldn't describe it this way, but here we go. So there's this pot of gold that you have found, and then you kind of reverse the rainbow and go back and help connect those agencies and unify people to get to that pot of money and then understand what their needs are and have built an entire successful organization for years. And can you talk a little bit about how you bring those communities to that goal, to that source, but most importantly, what we're doing as an industry when you shared that you're picking out, I want that big red fire truck and that command bus and this, and I have $0 to pay for it. And, or here we are on the recovery side of things. We had this big gap that we learned during the emergency, and you have the insight to see where this goes. And if you can talk about that a little bit.
You know, coming from the vantage point of the business side of the public safety market, I've never done the job of probably anybody that's on this call. And I'm probably not qualified to do it as well as everyone on this call can do it. So I had to look for areas that I could add value. And the number one area I learned I can add value was having conversations with municipalities throughout the country that would tell me, I need this, I need that, I don't have any money, I don't know where to get the money. So I asked a simple question: if I help you find the money, would you buy from my organization? And they said, absolutely. So I started learning about grants shortly after 9/11. And so what I learned is there's really 5 areas that any organization needs to be very good at to obtain the money to solve the problem. Because really that's the whole thing. You have problem X and the money's going to help solve it because it's going to allow you to buy solution Y. So the 5 things that I see is, number one, you have to be able to sell the project. And what I mean by selling the project, it might be to the leadership at your agency, it might be your city council, it might be your county board, it might be your regional board, but you have to be able to sell the project, that it's a sound, viable, and compelling project that can be funded. Once you have everybody on board, the next thing is you got to know where to look for money. What grants can I apply for? And I teach you as an agency have to start building a Rolodex, if you will, using an old school term, of grants that you can go to, maybe every year, maybe when there's a need. Private funding's usually available all year round, where your federal and state funding, usually there's a window. And if you time it right, you get your application in during the window, you're able to get the money, and then you're good to go. Events happen when they happen. They don't happen during that window or just before it so you can get the money. So private funding is ongoing. You could apply for private money in most cases any time of the year. So having that Rolodex built of, okay, here's the federal grants I could go after, here's the state grants I can go after, here's the private grants I can go after. That to me is stage 2, is you have to know and have your Rolodex of grants. The third thing you have to do is you have to build rapport with these grantors. And you know, the thing I teach my team is understand and appreciate the other person's world. Find out what's really going on. And the way to do that is to pick up the phone, send an email, and talk to the point of contact. Every grant has somebody that's responsible to review applications, approve applications, answer questions, cut checks, build rapport with them, help them understand the project through your voice, through your experience, not just to be a blind application and justification that just lands on their desk or in their inbox. So they understand it from your point of view. And then you have the opportunity to learn, well, what's most important to you if you're going to write a check for a project? What do you need to hear from us? What matters most? And then craft your project, not make up stories, but craft it based on what they need to hear. That's the third thing. The fourth thing is then the application process, your narrative, your application. You want to make sure you have a problem that the grantor is willing to fund to solve. The problem has to be significant, so it has to be a big problem. So you have to show how it's impacting your community. You have to show how the problem is solvable. So I like to say, define the problem in solvable terms, saving time and money, reducing liability, saving lives, things of that nature. Then step 4 is the implementation. You have to show a strategy. How are you going to get this project off the ground over a 12-month period from day 1 to 1 year? What are you going to do? And then lastly, you have to show a cost that's reflective from a vendor. It can't be a cost you pull out of thin air. It has to be justifiable. All that is part of building a justification. We can go, you can spend hours talking about that, but that's just a big picture. And then the fifth thing is, once that money has been secured and you've received it, it doesn't always end up in your hands immediately. Sometimes it ends up in an elected official's hands, city council, county boards, and they control the funds because a lot of times there's an expiration date and they will sit on the money until it's about to expire. The reality is, if you're applying for funding, you have a problem today. You don't have a problem that you want to solve next year. You want to solve it as soon as possible. So one of the things I love about private money, it goes right to you. It usually doesn't go to an elected official, and it doesn't get tied up in finance. And so understanding how to play those 5 parts of the game, and I call it a game because not because I don't consider it important.
Sure.
I call it a game because we all played games when we were kids, and we all wanted to play those games to win. So we had to understand the rules and learn how to best play the game within those rules. And those are the 5 areas that I feel if you learn to master, you'll have a consistent flow of money for preparedness, response, recovery, and relief.
There's a lot in that, but what comes to my mind, and maybe some others that are listening, is, can you give us like a specific project, an example? It could be a large pot of money or a small pot. I feel whether we're representing our government jobs or maybe our nonprofits, sometimes $4,000 is all you needed to get something done. And then at other times you need several million to get something done. So can you talk about maybe two examples of work you've done with real grants?
Absolutely. So we worked with a volunteer fire department up in Wisconsin, and they were looking for area scene lighting, and they were going to use it for investigations. They wanted to also use it possibly for drones, for deployment of drones. And so the first thing we needed to do was learn about, okay, you want the lighting. That's fantastic. How are you going to use it? Who else could benefit from this lighting being in your community? Again, the more, you want to look at a project almost like a Swiss Army knife. The more applications, the better chance it's going to be approved and better chance it's going to be funded. So we directed them to a couple sources. One of them happened to be FM Global. FM Global is an insurance company, but they will fund projects for arson investigations, and area scene lighting can be used for arson investigations. So we confirmed that that would be one of the benefits for the agency. They were able to get $3,000 from them. They ended up also getting another couple $1,000s from a local business in the community to fund the project and able to get the lighting. So it was about a $5,000, it was like $5,600, I think was the amount for that project itself, but very, 4-figure project. So going, the other direction, for years, we were working with a company that supplied robotic platforms. And so they wanted a robot, but they didn't want one of those large robots for EOD missions. They wanted to have EOD applications, but they wanted something smaller they could put in their car so they can easily transport it. So something around the 40 to 70 pound weight mark, so you can pick it up and move it. So we worked on a project with an agency in California, and they wanted to use the robot. They wanted an arm on the robot. They wanted the robot to be able to climb stairs. They wanted the robot to be able to carry different types of sensors for hazmat applications as well. Eyes and ears, so they needed cameras, day and night cameras, and they needed audio so they can hear as well as speak, because they wanted to also use it for hostage negotiation. So they were going to use it to clear buildings, hostage negotiations, open doors, defuse bombs if needed. So understanding everything they were going to use, they went out and started applying for funds, and the window was perfect. They applied for the State Homeland Security Grant Program, explained the problems they were having in terms of different types of call outs. An incident happened where, because they had to send an officer into a barricaded situation, that there was gunfire and there was an injury. And they figured, okay, well, if we had a robot, we could send the robot in, and then we don't put any of our officers in harm's way. They ultimately got enough money. It was about $125,000 for that robotic platform. And they were able to make the purchase and then use that and deploy that accordingly.
Wow. Very incredible. Thank you. I really like what you shared about when there's an emergency, the grant usually can't happen right away as well. So what a great opportunity for us to continue to work with our private partners that are funding through grants, not just the federal side, because I know they probably all want things to happen faster, but for our private funding sources for grants, and just say, maybe most of the work is long-term planning, but maybe there's a smaller pot that's for immediate funds. And I think some of our local community in Collier County has something similar set up to that. I thank you so much, Michael. I'm going to pop back to Director Guthrie if he is still available on the line. I know that he still appears to be there. And if so, Director, would you be willing to share with us an incredible, what I like to call a Florida first, and started from your division, is the FROC program, and what that is and what that looks like for this state and hopefully maybe for the nation.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk instead of be on video chat, because I'm heading down the road here. But I want to listen in for any questions and answers. That's why I was hanging with you guys. So yes, I will talk about FROC in a second, but I want to go back to one thing, and I just grants. Our agency lives and dies by grants, but I hope everybody picked up on what I just said. We live and we die by grants. Emergency management, and if you're an elected official and you're on this call, please hear what I'm about to say. Emergency management is public safety, period. I should have said emergency management is public safety, exclamation point. If you are going to fund a public safety agency by a grant, I implore you, stop. We have got to get into a habit of, and I hear this all the time. Is there a grant for that? Is there a grant for that? We have got to get to a point where we stop trying to fund emergency management off of grants, and we've actually got to fund it as if it's a public safety agency. Sorry, I had to get on my high horse there for a second, but grants are really great for funding the robotic the robot that's going to be a 5-10 year shelf life, but it is not. We should never be utilizing state homeland security emergency management performance grant. We should never be funding agencies off of a grant that has not received any additional funding from the federal government, except for this last year in the previous 12. So anyway, I'll stop there. FROC, change over to FROC. FROC stands for Florida's Recovery Obligation Calculation. I firmly believe in the federally supported, state managed, locally executed approach. So what does state manage mean? State manage means we're trying to manage how we distribute money, how we manage collecting data, how we manage pushing data down, and just ultimately getting to a better point of how we manage risk, if you will, in the state of Florida. So Florida's recovery obligation calculation is centered around recovery. It's something that I've been working on for about 3 years now at the division. We are the first in the United States to do this, but there's basically 3 legs to this stool. First and foremost is a standardization, is leg 1. We're trying to get to a point where we standardize all forms that are used for recovery. And again, if you're an operator on this call, and I'm an operator, you do not understand that there is not one single ICS form, and please record me when I say this. There is not a single ICS form, ICS 201 through a 225, if you utilize the 260 that the Coast Guard has, okay? So ICS 201 through the 225, maybe the 260. There's not one single ICS form that will help you accurately fill out a project worksheet. Not one. And if you don't know that, go talk to your finance department or talk to your grants department that actually does the project worksheets. And you'll notate that there is not a single form that helps you do that. So what we did as a division, we said that's a part of the state managed approach. So we are now managing the collection of data that actually helps you create a project worksheet from the very first deployment or resource request. We started gathering data in such a manner that we are simultaneously filling out the project worksheet while the individual is doing that, doing the activity. So we're capturing the data from a form standardization standpoint that's going to help us auto-populate, again, utilizing technology, auto-populate our project worksheets. So that's stool number one, or leg number one of the stool. Leg number two of the stool is training. Training, going out, not, again, prepare for recovery. Prepare for recovery. So train for recovery. What does that mean? Take your state. I'll take Florida for me. How many people responded to Hurricane Ian that also was the same finance director, finance manager, budget manager that responded to Hurricane Irma 5 years ago? It may be that person has just done this for the very first time on a Category 4 hurricane. So what is your training cycle? What is your education cycle on procurements, on contracts, on other documentation at the people that fill out your recovery paperwork level, right? Whoever that may be, whether it's your emergency management agency or your budget finance folks. So training is a big piece of this. Based on the standardization, based on the training, specifically, especially in procurements and contracting, we will now go out and give an assessment. That's the third leg of the stool. We will do an assessment. It's a risk assessment based on the applicant. And you'll go through and provide your training documentation. You'll provide your plans, policies, procedures. You'll provide any training that you've taken. You'll tell us how you're standardizing, what platform are you using to standardize your methodologies? Have you adopted the state division emergency management programs or not, which we provide for free, by the way. So there's no excuse for that. What are you doing to help mitigate the risk to the state of Florida for these billions of dollars that are about to be given out? You go through that self-risk assessment form. We go through it with you. Let me rephrase, we review it with you. And then ultimately we assess a score. Think of the score as much like a credit score rating. The score can be anywhere from 20 to 85, 85 being the highest. But if you do eligible activities to train and document and do the proper procurement, have it reviewed, do the proper contracting and have it reviewed, you have plans, policies, and procedures, again, blue sky that get ready for gray sky, again, we're preparing for recovery, then we're going to give you credit and points for that. So now when you ask for a $10 million emergency protective measures overtime project worksheet, and it goes in and FEMA obligates it, we're going to give you 85% of that obligation while we audit the rest of it. Please understand, when it comes to your state agency, whatever state agency you are in the United States, FEMA is only going to audit 20% of it. And if it passes muster with them on the 20% audit, then they will obligate the full project. But the state is required to the state is required to audit 100% of that. So in Florida, we now have a risk-based methodology that if you are doing the things that you should be doing for your recovery and you're investing your time and effort into recovery, then we will reward that time and effort. So again, maximum number of dollars you can get is 8.5 or 85% in the scenario I just gave you. As soon as FEMA obligates that $10 million obligation for your overtime protective measures, then we're going to give you in Florida 8.5 million of that up front, non-audited, but we take that risk because we know that you're doing the things that you're supposed to be doing as a part of the recovery process, right? So that's what Florida's recovery obligation calculation is. FROC is the first of its kind in the country. We are standardizing every single form in categories A and B. Right now, to date, we have 56 standardized forms. We are, and this is nothing new. let me talk real quick, and I'll finish this up quickly, Lauren. But law enforcement. To my law enforcement partners on this call, we've been doing this since the 1960s. Uniform crime reporting statistics. It's a national standard, federally supported. Why? We get money from DOJ, DHS for law enforcement activities that are based on what? UCR codes and UCR crime reporting. So this is nothing new. You may say, well, it's only applicable to law enforcement. No, let me go to my friends at the fire service, National Fire Incident Reporting System, NIFRS. You guys haven't been around since the 60s, but I think it's been around since the late 70s, early 80s. Again, you're pushing data forward into a national system, and you are reporting certain things that make you eligible for safer grants, that make you eligible for other types of grants. Emergency medical reporting system, EMS, ICD-9, ICD-10 codes. I don't know if they're up to ICD-11 code yet, but you get the idea for my friends in the medical service. Folks, we are doing that in 3 veins of public safety: law enforcement, fire, EMS. And we have yet to start that in emergency management. The question is why? Well, in Florida, we're no longer asking that question. In Florida, we're starting to invent the wheel, and we're 3 years down the pipe. We do believe that this is going to become a national best practice. We don't know that it'll be adopted nationally, but we do believe it's going to be a national best practice. We know that at least 27 states in the United States are looking at what Florida is doing for potential rollout into their state managed approaches. So hopefully this next year that will go. We're in a pilot program right now with Hurricane Ian, and for this past hurricane season, the pilot has been going well. We have had a couple of bumps, but we intend on making this a statewide rollout, fully effective starting June 1 of 2023. All 67 states, all 411 cities, and about 1,000 special districts across the state will now be a part of this program and eligible to be a part of that program.
Well, we have been quite inspired and quite busy, and thank you very much, Director, for sharing that incredible program, and congratulations to the division again. We've got a couple questions. We are wrapping up. Time flies when we truly are learning together and having fun. Maybe we'll start first with Michael. A couple comments came in. First of all, they like you, Michael, so in case you're worried. Spot on, Michael, about how grant funders work and the relationship necessary to be successful. The one item I suggest to add is measurement of success, which serves the grantor's needs and your local administrator's needs. The addition doesn't fit nicely on one hand, though, or maybe does fit nicely. And so I think yesterday we were talking a little bit about the grant process, and the word that you used, I'm going to get this right, is the justification paper. So I don't know if you can comment on that a little bit, and then wrap up some thoughts on recovery for us before we pass over to Chris.
Management, and I always like to say you cannot manage what you don't measure. So having the ability to really show the grantor, all right, yes, we want X. Yes, we have Y problem. Here's what we're going to do to make sure that the funding you provide us to solve this problem is going to be properly implemented, from cutting a PO to receiving assets or training or software or some kind of service to getting trained up on the solution, to even letting the media know, listen, we went out and got this funding from this organization to solve this problem because we want to make sure we're better prepared, or we could better respond and keep everybody safer. And then, showing, the progression of the program through 12 months. You have to really have a very strong implementation plan, because a grantor wants to fund a problem they feel is big enough where they have funding set aside to solve, but they also don't want to end up on 60 Minutes because they gave you a bunch of money and you ended up doing something you shouldn't have been doing, or didn't really have a good plan on how to use the money. So that implementation is absolutely huge. And that's where I find the best approach to measure and manage is found, is how are you going to launch the program?
Excellent. Thank you. And any final thoughts on recovery and grants from your end?
Yes. There are, and again, I always go private first, just because, again, it's available all year round. And, we have a database, of over 2,400 grants now. And I want to say about 1,800 of those grants are private through corporations, foundations, you name it. The key is these organizations have disaster grants. It could be a preparedness, response, recovery, or relief grant. There's also community grants where they're community development, enhancement, and improvement. And again, disaster is a relatively decent sized funnel. A community, as I use my hands here, is a huge funnel. And so lots of things could enhance, improve, and develop a community. If you can connect those dots and show how your project's going to create a more stable environment for that community to grow, especially recovering from an event, increases the odds of getting that funding from those organizations. And because, again, a lot of these organizations, their workers live where you serve, their customers might be where you serve, and they want to create an environment where their customers and their workers feel safe and protected and can thrive, and stability is the key, and recovery promotes that stability.
That's incredible. Thank you, Michael, very, very much.
Thanks.
Chief Byrne, first, you struck a chord with generators, so now you've got to put your helmet on for a few seconds. And we had a couple great questions just briefly about generators, because I do appreciate that maybe our colleagues on the calls might not operate in the general generator space all the time. So if you wouldn't mind, backup generators, for those who are familiar, and the concept of solar generators. And I know that in a space where there is endless amounts of sun, if you'd like to just comment just on solar generators and the brief pros and cons. I know we're not asking you to sponsor that. And then during power outages, again, how are the devices charged so that people can electronically file their documentation? And with centrally located generators, do you have a bunch of power cords, or what does that look like to probably unify that perhaps for, this part wasn't asked, but maybe for a care facility or a localized shelter? And if you could just give us a little nod to generator expertise, and then we'll switch back to an EM recovery question for you.
Well, as I said earlier, I operate in a team, and my generator expertise team is our water and sewer utility department mechanics, as well as some people in our public works department. But just to be clear, we did not utilize solar generators. Our generators are diesel powered. The technology for solar does not seem to yet to be there to power the size of generators and the duration that we need. But typically these generators are fixed or portable. They are attached to a transfer switch at the building, at the facility, that transfers over. And the goal when you're pursuing generators is you want 100% operation of that building, so which would include all your lighting and air conditioning and climate control and your low voltage, all those types of things. So again, diesel is fairly available for refill as we go through long durations of outages, and that is the reason why our generator projects are all use diesel for fuel rather than solar. But I am confident that solar will get there. I'm confident we will be there in the future.
I agree with you. So I'm going to ask you this question, and then also just your final thoughts on recovery as we wrap up our amazing time together today. This question: why is there still a disconnect between response and recovery, considering that disasters have become increasingly more common? So why is there a disconnect between response and recovery?
Well, that's a
That's a good question, right? I thought I'd ask you.
I would say the disconnect is narrowing. I think the director just emphasized that, at least in the state of Florida, how much greater emphasis we're putting on it. The frequency of emergency disasters that we're dealing with is really forcing us to improve our recovery efforts, in particular on the financial side. It's our responsibility for our communities to recover financially and identify what's available for us. So we're narrowing that disconnect. Part of that disconnect may be maybe response is what we do every day, and in public safety and emergency management, and recovery is sometimes left to the financiers or consultants or other agencies, which is fine, but we are absolutely, in the state of Florida, we're definitely narrowing it, and I think you learned quite a bit about that today.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Chief. One last question. I've got to sneak this one in if Director Guthrie is still available. And it's an area of kind of living a life of service. I think we all went into this field. Can you briefly address how volunteer hours can be used to offset FEMA cost share? And I know that tracking volunteer hours electronically using your phones is an extremely valuable cost match, and something that Merit just absolutely supports wholeheartedly. But Director Guthrie, if you can comment on that in 50 seconds or less, no pressure.
So in 50 seconds or less, I mean, yes, the short answer is you can offset a majority of your local cost share on a federally declared incident by tracking your volunteer hours. Your volunteer hours have a value, whether that's a value at a volunteer rate, which is around, I think, $20 an hour right now, or if that volunteer is actually doing is acting as a firefighter, then you need to you can actually claim them as a firefighter rate of pay. So whatever one is higher, not lower, whatever one is higher, you can do that. So that's 50 seconds or less.
Thank you, Director Guthrie, very much. At this time, we have had so many great questions, so much amazing insight. Again, recovery deserves lots of love, and I am so grateful for the teams that are running recovery operations, and obviously those who are part of that all phases of emergency management. But for today's conversation, recovery was our focus. We are grateful for your endless leadership in the emergency services field. I can't thank Chief Burns, Michael, CO Michael, and Director Guthrie enough for their time today and joining this amazing conversation. We're also very grateful for everyone who dialed in to listen to us. And if you have any suggestions, things you'd like to participate with Merit on and join us for our next webinar, we'd love to hear from you. We really just want to continue the conversations. We want to continue to grow and break down some barriers between different agencies and organizations. So thank you again for your service to all, and we wish you a great, safe, wonderful day. Have a good one all.